It was like waking up from a nightmare and hoping to wake up from a nightmare and saying, this is a joke. And I broke down and I couldn't believe it.
The studio lights felt warm on her face, almost too warm. Priscilla Presley sat across from the interviewer, her posture perfect as always, that practiced smile in place. At 78 years old, she had done thousands of interviews about Elvis. She knew how to handle the questions, the memories, the inevitable tears from fans who still mourned him. But when the producer handed her the photograph, something changed. Her hands started trembling. The color drained from her carefully made-up face. And then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times online, she whispered 5 words that stopped everyone in the room cold. "That's not Elvis in there." What was in that photograph? Why did it shake Priscilla so deeply that she nearly collapsed? And what does this reveal about the man the world thought they knew? To understand what happened in that studio, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time when Priscilla was just a girl and Elvis was already becoming a god. Priscilla Ann Wagner was 14 years old when she first saw Elvis Presley. The year was 1959, and she was living in Wiesbaden, Germany, where her stepfather, an Air Force officer, had been stationed. Elvis was there too, drafted into the army, trying to be a regular soldier despite being the most famous entertainer in the world. A mutual friend arranged for them to meet at Elvis's rented house off base. Priscilla wore a navy and white sailor dress. Her dark hair was styled high, making her look older than her years, though not by much. Elvis was 24. She was 14. Even by 1959 standards, it raised eyebrows. But Elvis wasn't interested in her the way people assumed. Not at first. He was lonely in Germany, grieving his mother Gladys, who had died just months before. What he wanted was someone to talk to, someone who didn't want anything from him, someone who reminded him of simpler times. Priscilla became that person. They would sit for hours in his living room, Elvis at the piano, playing gospel songs while she listened. He told her about his mother, about his fears that his career might be over, about the crushing weight of being Elvis Presley. Their relationship was strange from the start, more father-daughter than romantic, at least in those early years. Elvis controlled everything: what she wore, how she styled her hair, when she could see friends. He was creating something, molding her into his ideal woman. Priscilla, young and sheltered, didn't recognize it as control. She thought it was love. When Elvis returned to America in 1960, Priscilla thought she might never see him again. She cried for days. Her parents tried to comfort her, tried to help her move on. But Elvis called, and called again. And then he invited her to visit Graceland for Christmas. Her parents said no, obviously. Their 14-year-old daughter flying alone to Memphis to stay with a 25-year-old rock star? But Elvis was persuasive. He promised she would stay with his father and stepmother. He promised she would be chaperoned at all times. He promised to take care of her like she was his own daughter. Somehow, impossibly, they agreed. Priscilla boarded a plane to Memphis, and her childhood effectively ended. Life at Graceland was unlike anything she had imagined. The mansion felt alive with people at all hours. The Memphis Mafia, Elvis's close circle of friends and bodyguards, filled the rooms with laughter and music and constant motion. Elvis slept during the day and came alive at night. Priscilla adjusted her entire schedule to match his, staying awake until dawn, sleeping through the afternoon. She was still in high school, still living in Germany, but more and more of her life existed in Memphis, in those long nights at Graceland, waiting for Elvis to notice her. By 1962, Priscilla's parents agreed to let her move to Memphis permanently. She was 17. Elvis enrolled her in an all-girls Catholic school, hired tutors, and set her up in a house nearby. She graduated in 1963, and then the real transformation began. Elvis sent her to modeling school to learn how to walk and pose. He brought in a hairstylist who dyed her hair jet black and styled it in a towering beehive. He chose her clothes, her makeup, everything. He was creating his perfect woman, and Priscilla was cooperating because she loved him, because she didn't know any different, because she believed this was what love looked like. But Elvis wouldn't marry her. Year after year passed. Priscilla lived in his house, shared his bed, organized his life, but wore no ring. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was terrified of what marriage might do to Elvis's image. The screaming girls who bought records and concert tickets wanted to believe Elvis was available. A wife would ruin that fantasy. So Priscilla existed in limbo, not quite a girlfriend, not quite a wife, always waiting for Elvis to decide her future. The proposal finally came in 1966. Priscilla was 21, and she had started to pull away. She had her own friends now, her own life separate from Elvis. He could feel her slipping, and it terrified him. On Christmas Eve, he gave her a 3.5-carat diamond ring. They married on May 1, 1967, in a small ceremony in Las Vegas. 8 minutes long, presided over by a Nevada Supreme Court justice, with only 14 guests present. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding Priscilla had dreamed of all those years. It felt rushed, almost like Elvis wanted to get it over with. But she was finally Mrs. Elvis Presley, and that was supposed to fix everything. It didn't fix anything. Marriage revealed what Priscilla had been ignoring for years. Elvis didn't want a partner. He wanted a doll, a possession, something beautiful to display, but never challenge him. The rules got stricter after the wedding, not looser. She couldn't work, couldn't have her own career, couldn't even leave the house without permission. Elvis was often gone, filming movies in Hollywood or performing in Vegas, surrounded by other women. But Priscilla was expected to stay at Graceland, faithful and waiting. 9 months after the wedding, Priscilla gave birth to Lisa Marie Presley on February 1, 1968. Elvis loved his daughter with an intensity that surprised everyone. He held her for hours, sang to her, called her his little princess. But fatherhood didn't change him. If anything, it made things worse. Elvis started treating Priscilla more like a mother than a wife. He stopped touching her, stopped sleeping in their bedroom. He said he couldn't see her the same way now that she was a mother. Priscilla was 22 years old, married to the most desired man in the world, and utterly alone. The pills were always there, but they got worse after Lisa Marie's birth. Elvis took them to sleep, to wake up, to perform, to numb whatever pain lived inside him. His doctor, George Nicopolis, prescribed them freely. Uppers, downers, painkillers, sleeping pills, a pharmaceutical cocktail that kept Elvis functioning but barely human. Priscilla would find him passed out in the bathroom, slumped over in chairs, mumbling incoherently. She begged him to stop. She flushed pills down the toilet, confronted his doctor, pleaded with his father. Nothing changed. Elvis was disappearing, and she couldn't save him. By 1972, Priscilla couldn't take it anymore. She had met someone, a karate instructor named Mike Stone, who treated her like a person instead of a possession. She told Elvis she was leaving. He didn't believe her at first. No one left Elvis Presley. But Priscilla packed her bags, took Lisa Marie, and moved out of Graceland. The divorce was finalized on October 9, 1973. They had been married for 6 years. Elvis was devastated. He called her constantly, begging her to come back, promising to change. But Priscilla knew better. She loved him, would always love him, but she couldn't live with him. They stayed close after the divorce, closer than many people realized. Priscilla brought Lisa Marie to visit regularly. Elvis called her for advice about business decisions, about his career, about his loneliness. She was still the person who understood him best, who knew both the public Elvis and the private one. And she watched, helpless, as he continued to decline. The performances got worse. He forgot lyrics, stumbled on stage, sweated through his jumpsuits. The weight came and went in dramatic swings. His face looked puffy and distant. The pills never stopped. August 16, 1977. The day every Elvis fan knows by heart. Priscilla got the call in the afternoon. Elvis was dead. Found in his bathroom at Graceland, slumped on the floor, his face against the red shag carpet. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, a heart attack. But everyone knew the real cause: the pills, the prescription drugs that had been slowly killing him for years. Priscilla flew to Memphis immediately, Lisa Marie with her. She had to see him one last time. The funeral was chaos. 50,000 people lined the streets outside Graceland. Fans screamed and fainted and threw themselves against the gates. Inside the mansion, Elvis lay in a copper coffin in the foyer, dressed in a white suit, his face made up to look peaceful. Priscilla stood over him for a long time. She touched his hand, cold and stiff. She whispered things only he would have understood. And then she had to step back and let the world mourn him. This man who belonged to everyone and no one. In the years after his death, Priscilla became the keeper of Elvis's legacy. She took over Graceland when it was drowning in debt and turned it into one of the most visited private homes in America. She fought to protect his image, his music, his memory. She gave interviews, appeared at events, smiled for cameras, and told the same stories over and over. The world loved her for it. She was the devoted ex-wife, the woman who never stopped loving Elvis, even when loving him had nearly destroyed her. But privately, Priscilla carried questions she couldn't answer. Things about Elvis's death that never made sense. The timeline was wrong. His body had been found around 2:30 p.m., but the last time anyone saw him alive was around 9:30 that morning when he went upstairs after playing racquetball. 5 hours. What happened in those 5 hours? Why was his body in such strange condition when they found him? Why did the autopsy results get sealed? Why did so many details get buried? Priscilla heard the conspiracy theories like everyone else, that Elvis faked his death, that he was in witness protection, that he couldn't handle the fame anymore and staged his own disappearance. She dismissed them publicly, called them disrespectful to his memory. But privately, late at night, she wondered. There were moments that didn't fit. Phone calls that came from disconnected numbers. Sightings that seemed too detailed to be fan fantasies. A photograph that surfaced years later showing a man who looked exactly like Elvis boarding a plane to Argentina. She never spoke about these doubts. What would be the point? Elvis was gone, buried at Graceland next to his mother. Lisa Marie needed to grieve properly, to have closure. The fans needed their icon to rest in peace. And Priscilla needed to move forward with her own life. She remarried, had more relationships, built a career separate from Elvis. But the questions stayed with her, quiet and persistent, like a song she couldn't quite remember but couldn't forget. Decades passed. Priscilla became a grandmother. Lisa Marie had her own children, her own struggles with fame and addiction, and the weight of being Elvis's daughter. The world changed around them, But Elvis remained frozen in time, forever 42, forever the king. Graceland stood as a monument to his memory. The jumpsuits were preserved behind glass. The jungle room stayed exactly as he left it. Everything carefully maintained to keep the legend alive. Then came the photograph. A researcher had been going through FBI files, documents related to an old case involving organized crime in the 1970s. Buried in a box of surveillance photos was an image from 1978, a year after Elvis died. It showed a man at a small airport in rural Argentina. The man wore sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, but his profile was unmistakable. The jawline, the curve of his lip, the way he held his shoulders. It looked exactly like Elvis Presley. The photograph circulated online for years. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was proof Elvis had faked his death. Skeptics said it was just a look-alike, or a doctored image, or a case of people seeing what they wanted to see. The FBI never confirmed or denied whether the photo was authentic. The case file it came from remained partially classified. No one could prove anything either way. But the image haunted people who had loved Elvis. That familiar face in an unfamiliar place, living a life no one knew about. Priscilla had seen the photo years ago when it first appeared. She looked at it once, declared it a fake, and refused to discuss it further. She had spent decades protecting Elvis's legacy. She wasn't going to let some grainy airport surveillance photo undo all that work. But the image stayed with her. She found herself thinking about it at odd moments. In dreams, she saw Elvis boarding that plane, disappearing into a new life, free from the fame that had imprisoned him. The interview was supposed to be routine. A major network documentary about Elvis's life, marking the 45th anniversary of his death. Priscilla had agreed to participate, to share memories, to talk about the man behind the legend. She had done it 100 times before. The questions were predictable. How did you meet? What was he really like? Do you still love him? She answered on autopilot, the same polished responses she had given for years. Then the producer pulled out a folder. He said they had obtained something through a Freedom of Information request, a previously classified document from the FBI's files. He wanted to show it to Priscilla to get her reaction on camera. She agreed without thinking much about it. She had seen plenty of FBI documents about Elvis over the years. The government had kept files on him because of his influence, his ability to move crowds, his connections to various people and places. Nothing in those files had ever surprised her. The producer handed her a photograph. At first, Priscilla didn't understand what she was looking at. It was the Argentina airport photo, but not the version that had circulated online. This was a different angle, clearer, showing more detail. And there were other photos with it, a series taken over several minutes, as the man moved through the small terminal. In one image, the sunglasses had slipped down slightly, revealing his eyes. In another, the baseball cap had come off as he bent to pick up a bag. The resemblance wasn't just similar. It was exact. Priscilla's hands started shaking. She brought the photo closer to her face, studying every detail. The interviewer asked her what she saw, if she recognized the person. She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up. Because there was something in those photos that no one else would notice, something only she would know. The man in the airport was wearing a bracelet on his right wrist, a simple leather band with a silver clasp. Elvis had worn an identical bracelet, a gift from his mother that he never took off. He had been wearing it when Priscilla last saw him alive. The room went silent. Everyone was staring at her, waiting for her to say something. Priscilla tried to compose herself. to give the expected response, to dismiss the photos as a cruel hoax, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "That's not Elvis in there." She meant it wasn't Elvis in the grave at Graceland. It couldn't be. Because if these photos were real, if this evidence was authentic, then Elvis had been alive in 1978, walking through an airport in Argentina, wearing his mother's bracelet, living a life the world knew nothing about. Priscilla stood up too quickly. The room spun. Someone grabbed her arm to steady her, but she pulled away. She needed air, needed space, needed to think. The producer was talking, asking if she was okay, saying they could stop filming. But Priscilla wasn't listening. She was thinking about that morning in 1977, the last time she talked to Elvis on the phone. He had sounded strange, distant, but also excited about something. He said he loved her and Lisa Marie. He said to take care of each other. At the time, she thought it was the pills talking, making him emotional and paranoid. What if it was goodbye? The interview never aired. The network's legal team killed it, too worried about lawsuits and conspiracy theories and the backlash from Elvis's estate. Priscilla signed a non-disclosure agreement, legally prevented from discussing what she saw in those photographs. The producer claimed the FBI photos were returned to the archives, though no one could confirm that. The whole incident disappeared, buried under legal threats and hush money and the weight of protecting a legend that had become bigger than the man himself. Priscilla went back to her life. She attended Elvis events, gave interviews, maintained the carefully constructed narrative of his life and death. But something had broken inside her. The certainty she had carried for decades was gone. She didn't know anymore what was true and what was mythology. Had Elvis died in 1977? Or had he escaped? Was he buried at Graceland? Or was that someone else? Did he choose to leave her and Lisa Marie behind? Or did circumstances force him away? The questions multiplied, and there were no answers, only silence and suspicion. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Priscilla sometimes imagined Elvis alive somewhere, living in a small house by the ocean, far from fame and crowds and the crushing expectations of being the king. She imagined him older now, maybe with gray in his hair, his face lined and weathered, but peaceful in a way it never was during his public life. She imagined him thinking about her sometimes, wondering if she knew the truth, hoping she understood why he had to go. The world still loves Elvis Presley, the legend, the icon, the eternal king of rock and roll. But Priscilla loved a different Elvis, the man who was terrified and lonely and desperate for escape. She loved him enough to let him go, if that's what happened. And she loved him enough to protect his secret, if there was one to protect. That photograph, those 5 whispered words, the moment of collapse in the studio, they all pointed to a truth too complicated for public consumption. Some mysteries, she learned, are meant to stay buried, and some loves are too deep to ever fully explain.